So it's time to set up our project, and we've already got a lot of work done. And I'm looking now at what we last finished with when we were experimenting with sessions, and I have all this code written, and I don't want to rewrite this from scratch because this is a good starting point for our web application. Things will change as time goes on, but this is absolutely a good starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the source files from this project into a new project. And I'm going to do that on a Mac. You go to the Finder. On Windows, you go to your File Explorer or Windows Explorer. And I know all of my files are in this Hello World folder. And that file exists right here. That folder exists right here. So I have two windows open. One is looking at the existing Hello World folder from the top level. I'll go inside that. And the other one is in the same place where that Hello World folder is. And I'm going to create a new folder, which I will call Bookings. Got to call it something. Bookings works. And I'm going to open that folder. And then from here, I will copy all of the files that I want to save, which is everything except for those Go mod and Go sum files. So I will copy them from here to here. And then I'll go back and open up that project folder. Now I'm in Goland. You're probably in Visual Studio Code, but close that project in Visual Studio Code and open a new one. So I'm going to just open, and you'll choose Open Folder in Visual Studio Code, of course. I will find that folder, which I stored in Visual Studio Code. There it is. And I'll open the folder I just created called Bookings. And I'll open it. Now, it'll give me errors because I didn't actually... I have to go mod init and all those things. So let's open it up and see how it looks. Command web main.go. And of course there are errors. It can't find config app config. I'm not worried about that at all. I'll just open my terminal window, and now I'm going to give this a Go modules file, go mod init, but this time I'm going to actually use a real GitHub repository. It doesn't exist yet. I'm going to create that shortly, or probably in the next lecture, but I'm going to call this github.com/tsoller, which is my username, and I'll call this Bookings. And it creates that. Good start. Now that that's created, I need to enable the integration, and I will say enable Go modules integration and click OK. And you'll do a similar thing in Visual Studio Code, although I think it might be smart enough if you just quit out of it and start it back up, it'll be good. Good, so I've created that, but I still have errors. Why? Because up here I'm implementing or importing Go course, and I should be importing Bookings. And Bookings, I'll just copy and paste it in there. I can't find Alex Edwards yet, but that's okay. It will when I run it. So I'll ignore that error. Any other errors here I need to worry about? All the session cookie stuff? No, that's it for that one. What about middleware? Set base cookie, what's that importing? It just hasn't imported that yet, but it will when I run it, so don't worry about it. And roots go, same thing. I need to fix the imports here. From Go course, that becomes Bookings and Bookings. Those will be imported automatically, I hope. And that's it for that. Let's try package config. No errors in that. Good. Oops. Handlers. There's errors in that one. Yeah, again here. Paste. 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 And that should be it for that. Models. Shouldn't be any problems in this one. Nope. And render. Are there errors here? There are. Go course gets changed to Bookings, and Go course gets changed to Bookings. All right. Now, let's just see what happens if I run this. So I'm in my Bookings folder, in my terminal, go run command web star.go. Let's see if it automatically imports these things. It goes and finds those. And I have an error. And the error is could not find module. This is in render.go. So let's have a look at that. Oh, I misspelled Bookings. Let's try that again. Clear the screen. Run this. Perfect. The application started. So I should be able to go to my web browser and hit that page, which I will do. I will open the page. Localhost 8080, and it should give me what it did last time. Good, so now that's running. That's great. Now I want to commit this to a Git repository, and I'm going to push to GitHub. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it's always a good idea to push to GitHub because that way you have two copies of your code, one locally and one on GitHub. Now I'm going to do that, but before I do it, there are certain things I do not want to store in my repository. There are things that I want to have locally or have to have locally, and I can do that on a Mac by doing ls-la to show me what is actually in this folder. So I look at the folder over here, it appears I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. But if I actually do an ls-la, you'll see I have this thing, .idea. And the dot in front of it means, on a Mac at least, you can't see that folder. And that's just stuff created by the IDE I'm using. And there's probably a similar thing for Visual Studio Code, but I don't want to bother committing that to Git. So what I'm going to do is create a new file here. At the root level of my project, I'll create a new file, and I'm going to give that the name, and it has to start with a dot. G-I-T-I-G-N-O-R-E. Gitignore. And inside of that, I'm going to put the name of that folder, which is .idea, and I want it to ignore that. And I'll probably be adding more things to this over time. What the gitignore file does is it tells the version control system, Git, which I'm going to talk about momentarily, to ignore, don't put into the Git repository things that are listed in the gitignore folder. And I definitely don't want the IDE's settings to be stored in my Git repository because they're of no value to anyone else. Should I have someone else work on this? They're going to probably use their own IDE. Maybe they're using Visual Studio Code. Maybe they're using the Sublime text editor. Whatever it may be, they're probably not going to want the same settings that I do, so I'm going to ignore that. All right, so in a minute, we're going to actually create a Git repository and store things in it. But how do we do that? Well, first of all, you have to have Git. If you already have Git installed, you can skip this part. But if you don't, you need to go get it. So you fire up your favorite web browser and go to git-scm.com and then click on the downloads button. And so if I go to the home page for git.scm.com, I'm here and I actually want to download it. So I'll click on downloads and again, choose the one appropriate for your operating system. I'm on a Mac, so I would download this. I already have it installed, but so I don't have to. If you're on Windows, go here. If you're on Linux, go here. Or if you're using Homebrew on a Mac or its equivalent on Windows, install Git however you want. Once it's installed, come back to this course, just pause it right now, and we'll actually set up a Git repository, okay? All right, so hopefully you have Git installed. I'm now going to go back to my command or my terminal in my editor. I will clear the screen. I will make sure I'm in the root level of my project, and I am. And now I'm just going to type git init and hit return. And it creates an empty Git repository. Great. Now I want to add everything in this directory, everything inside the bookings folder, except what is ignored by gitignore. And I do that just by saying git add dot, which means add everything in this directory that's not specified in the gitignore file. It adds it. And then I need to actually commit it. Git commit -m and then put a message in quotation marks. Initial commit. Now what might happen when you press enter at this point is it might say, oh no, I don't know who you are. You need to specify a name and an email address. But it will take you through the steps necessary to do that. And then you can actually do the commit at that point. I already have my username and so forth set up, so I'll commit it. And it's now, everything is committed. So if I actually clear the screen, and on a Mac at least, on Windows there's a similar command, but I can't recall what it is. You probably know what it is. ls-l shows me now I have ls-la. Now I have a new folder here called .git, and that is my local Git repository. And you don't need to push this to GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever if you don't want to, but I encourage you to do so. It's very useful to be able to do that. So how do I do that? I'm going to push this to a GitHub repository. So I go back to my web browser. I go to just go to github.com. And you'll need to create an account if you've not done so. So you can create an account and I can look at my repositories. I actually want to create a new repository. Create an account on GitHub if you haven't already done so. And you can see I've got lots of projects on the go here right now. Then, when you've done that, go to the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner and say New Repository. And I'm going to call mine Bookings. Hopefully I haven't used this name already. Bookings is available. Good. So I'm going to make this a public repository. You can make it private if you don't want people looking at it, but I don't mind people looking at this. In fact, I'm going to allow you to download the source code after any given lecture by coming to my GitHub repository, but I'll talk more about that later. So I'm going to create it. I'm not going to add a README file. I'm not going to add a gitignore. I'm not going to choose a license. I'm just going to create the repository. And then it gives me instructions. So I create this repository, and it says, quick setup. If you've done this, no, we're not going to skip that. Or create a new repository. We've already done that. Or push an existing repository. That's what we want. So I'm going to copy this first line, go back to my terminal, clear the screen, paste it in. Great, that's done. Then I'll go back to my instructions, copy this line, which creates a main branch, and then copy the third line and push it. Push. Perfect. So it is pushed. Now, if I come back to this page on GitHub, which is just github.com/your username/whatever you called your repository, and refresh the page, you'll see that my source code is now up there. And it has this little note here: help people interested in this repository understand your project by adding a README. Well, don't do it here. You can if you want to. Do it over here. So all you need to do is to go to the root level of your project and create a new file, and call it README. And it does have to have this name, readme.md, which stands for Markdown. And it creates a new blank file. And mine helpfully starts up a kind of preview for Markdown. Markdown is just a common way of putting information up and specifying certain formatting without using something like Microsoft Word. Because you don't know that somebody has Microsoft Word or Pages on a Mac or whatever it may be. README is just a way of formatting things really quickly. So I'm going to give my project a title. And you do that by typing a hash mark, and then just whatever you want the title to be. And my title will be Bookings and Reservations. And I get a preview over here. I don't know if you do in Visual Studio Code or not. Then I'll have some paragraph of text underneath it. This is the repository for my Bookings and Reservations project. And it's always good to say what's used to build this. So I'm going to create a list built in Go version, and whatever version you're using. I'm using 1.15. External dependencies. Uses the Qi router. Uses Alex Edwards SCS session management. What other things are we using? Let's look at our Go mod. Oh yes, no surf. So I'll copy this and go back to my README. Uses no surf. And I'll make that actually a link. And I'll make it a link, I forget which way it goes. I think it goes like this. We'll find out. And then this. Nope, other way around. Square brackets around what you want the link to look like. And parentheses around what you want it to link to. And this creates a hyperlink. All right, so I've created that. I should probably do the same thing for Alex Edwards, just so I can quickly get where it's going, and for Qi, so I'll copy that. Come back to the README, uses the Qi router, which goes in square brackets. And then in parentheses, the link. And SCS. I'll go back to Go mod. Find Alex Edwards, copy that, go back to my README, and I will put this in square brackets, and then in parentheses the link that it goes to. All right, so that should do it. I probably should put an HTTPS in front of these. It might be smart enough to figure it out, but you never know. All right, so I have made a change to this file. The thing that should be showing up here is it should be saying, hey, you're using a Git repository. One of the nice things about using Git and an IDE is that typically it will show you what files have changed over here by changing their color. So I'm going to go to Goland, choose Preferences, look for Version Control, and I am going to add a directory. Or actually, I can probably just quit out of this and then start it back up, and it should realize there's a Git repository once it starts up. And it did. So you notice that this one is in red, and it's similar. I believe it is red as well in Visual Studio Code. So what I'm going to do is say add. So I can just click on this, or right click on this, and choose Git and choose add. Now it's been added. Okay, so the change has been made here, but it's not been pushed to the Git repository yet. So I can go to VCS, which is Version Control System, and I can choose Git push, and it will push it. Now, I'm not going to do it right now because I want to start up Visual Studio Code and do it from there to see how it works in that one. So you don't have to take this step if you're using Goland, but if you're on Visual Studio Code, let's look and see how it works there. So I'll quit out of this. I'll start up Visual Studio Code. It remembers where I am. I don't want to be there, so I'll just say open. I will find my bookings folder and open it. And over here, it says, hey, look, your Go mod has changed and your README has changed as well. So let's push these things to VCS. And over here on the left-hand side, that looks like source control to me. That's my version control system, which Microsoft calls source control, which is fine. So I'll click on that and I will say up here, what do I have? I have toggle view mode, I have commit, I have refresh, view and more action. Let's push it. I want to push this to Git. So off it goes, I push it to Git, and it says, would you like to code to, yes, run git fetch periodically? Sure, why not? So it should be pushed. So hopefully, if I go over to my Git repository and refresh this, no, didn't push it yet. Commit and push, commit staged there, and the commit is added a Git repository, and now I can push it. Let's push it. Push. It's working away, and it looks like it's done. So now when I come back here and refresh this, my README should be there, and it is. So I added my README. I have my gitignore there. All the files are there. The git mod, the git sum. Now the great thing about this is this gives you a safety net. Let's say I'm working away on my project for a long time and I start making mistakes. And I say, oh, man, I wish I'd saved a copy of this 20 minutes ago. Well, Git allows you to live with a little less anxiety in your life because I can always roll back to the last known good version of a source file. Or I can go back to any version of the source file. Every time I commit and push, Git stores a history for every single file in my project. And I can even, and we'll do this later on, tag known versions of a project. So I can say, aha, this is done. This is now going to be version 0.5. And I can, anytime I want to, go back to my Git repository and look under here, and you will see that we have tags. Now, we haven't created any yet, so there's nothing there, but we can create tags and go back to a known good version of it. The other nice thing about this is if, like me, you work in more than one place. I work in an office that has a computer, and I work at home that has a computer, and I have a laptop I take places. So I have 3 different places that I regularly work. One of the things that is great about Git is I can work on one machine, then commit and push my changes, go home and just pull from that repository, and then I have exactly the same information on my home computer as I do on my office computer. So I encourage you to create an account on GitHub and push stuff up here because it will make your life easier. It's not necessary. You can work with the local Git repository, but if you're working in more than one place, things are going to get out of sync very, very quickly. So Git is your friend. All right, in the next lecture, we'll actually start creating some pages, just some static pages for our website. So we'll be exploring some some HTML, putting some graphics on, figuring out how to serve static assets, because we can't do that yet. You'll hear about that in the next lecture. And we'll start mocking up what we want our final site to look like. That's enough for now.